Hello, I'm Ted Asregadoo, and this is Truthout Interviews, where I get to have a one-on-one with some of the writers who contribute to the news and opinion site Truthout. Candice Bernd is the assistant editor and a reporter with Truthout and has penned an article about the Common Core State Standard Initiative that's been adopted by 45 states and the amount of corporate influence in this initiative. Hi, Candice. Welcome to Truthout Interviews.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for having me on.
First off, for those who might not know what the Common Core is, could you bring us up to speed on what that is?
Right. Well, the Common Core is just a set of sort of national standards for education. And Arne Duncan announced in 2009 an educational policy called Race to the Top. And Race to the Top sort of tries to influence the states to adopt the Common Core standards by rewarding schools with grants, grant money, who sort of sign on to the standards. And basically what we're seeing is while other countries have standard sort of curriculum that does better education for the most part, what we're seeing is that with the Common Core, there's a lot of corporate influence. And so while some say, Common Core is really good for education, what Morna McDermott, who is an educator, and she sort of uncovered this corporate trend behind Common Core, she is sort of looking at the ways in which corporations are all vying for influence within that educational curriculum.
I went on their website, on the Common Core's website, to find out essentially, who was behind this, just on their FAQ. And when I read through it, they really promoted the fact that teachers and other educators who are involved in the education process, not necessarily affiliated with any kind of a corporation or corporate influence, are the ones behind crafting this initiative from the standards point of view. But what the article uncovers is that the fact that they're promoting that teachers are the ones that are crafting the Common Core. The money that's pouring in or that is funding this initiative is coming from corporations, and that's not even listed on their website.
I mean, there's definitely teachers that are involved in the crafting process behind the curriculum, but it also kind of works like a revolving door structure where a lot of these the folks that are in education and have education backgrounds are also kind of have this revolving door in and out of educational corporations as well. And what Morna talks about with her chart is she sort of looks at all of the different corporations that are involved, and what she calls it is, she says it works like a sieve. So when Race to the Top awards these grants to these schools to adopt these standards, basically that money is being funneled through to educational corporations like In Bloom, like Pearson, because there's a lot of this modernization, this sort of technological influence in corporation. In Bloom, for example, we have another article on Truthout where it discusses how they're data mining students. And what they say is that they're collecting this data and it works in a way to sort of individualize their education. But at the same time, it's just massive amounts of data. I mean, some of the statistics they're collecting are on teen pregnancy, which is just kind of why would they need that information? So, I mean, it same works for Pearson. Basically, when these schools get their money, it's just getting funneled right back through to corporations. And it really is this massive revolving door structure.
You talked about the person who uncovered this. Her name is Morna McDermott, and maybe we could get into who she is. The chart that she created is featured on Truthout, and you also embedded a video that she made. This chart is huge, so she used her camera and she went through and talked about the connections between all the different companies and corporations that are involved in this Common Core initiative, and it's almost like the start of further research for her, like who profits from this, what do they expect to gain from being involved in this. Maybe we could talk a little bit about who she is. You said that she's an educator, but is she involved in anything beyond teaching?
Yes, she's working with a nonprofit organization called United Opt Out, and they are a sort of grassroots group of educators that are working basically to highlight the real problems in education, I think, and she's part of a movement of teachers right now that are fighting this sort of corporate influence by just pointing out that, the real problems in education come from poverty.
The Common Core is about raising the standards, educational standards of the students, but behind the scenes, you have these corporations that are profiting from it. Does that mean that the school districts that get this money, that get this grant money to adopt the Common Core initiatives and essentially raise the educational standards of the students as a whole, that really the money doesn't go to anything that is going to help with that educational process? And that could be also that some of these students are come from a very, very poor background, or are going to be tracked into we've talked a lot about this on Truthout, how the education system, at least in some enclaves in this country, tend to track students into the prison population. And so the real issue there is poverty. And the Common Core does not address that in any way. And what it does is it addresses how to enrich the corporations who stand to profit from this. And so the group that she's involved with, how are they trying to reform the Common Core? Because 45 states have adopted this, so this is going to happen. So is she trying to reform education at this point within the Common Core initiative, or is she trying to say, you know what, there needs to be something else? We need to start somewhere else.
What she is a big advocate for, and I don't want to speak too much for her, but I think that she would definitely advocate for alternative structures for learning. What Common Core and a lot of the sort of these market sort of based reforms in education definitely emphasize things like standardized testing. And in fact, when she created her chart is itself an example of an alternative form of education, a systems-based one, where she's creating this sort of visual web that you can kind of connect things to and look at it visually. And you just don't get that with a lot of these sort of alternative ways for students to learn that are a more creative way. You don't get that in what's coming out of the Common Core. And I think that she's a big advocate for making space to allow alternative pedagogies, if you will, to be there and be present in the school system instead of this constant emphasis on standardized testing. And to go back to the poverty issue, what we're seeing right now is that this education reform movement isn't helping students of color. It's not helping low-income communities. What we're seeing is massive school closures. She points out in Chicago, 54 schools were closed. 88% of the students there that are affected by those school closures are Black, 10% are Latino, and 94% are low income. In New York City, 26 schools are closed, 59% Black, 43% Latino, and 82% low income. In Philadelphia, 23 schools were closed, 81% Black, 11% Latino, and 93% low income. So, I mean, the statistics there, and that's coming from Naya Kalik. She's another wonderful Truthout writer. If you want to look at the school to pipeline sort of system, how our school closure is going to keep low-income students out of prison system, it makes no sense. And cutbacks have a lot. As these cutbacks are happening in these districts, you have these corporations coming in and they're looking to profit off of basically what are neoliberal educational reforms. So.
The last few writers I've had on Truthout, we've highlighted neoliberalism and the way in which this ideology is quite harmful to not only the economy, the environment, but also to education as well. Neoliberalism, for those who are watching this video for the first time and haven't looked at the other videos, they may not know exactly what that is or how it relates to this Common Core State Initiative. Can you talk a little bit about what neoliberalism is and how it relates to this education initiative?
It's just a market-based ideology, and while you can certainly point at a lot of problems and cracks in the public school system, they would point to just the market to fix those problems. And something that McDermott points out in all of this is the ALEC sort of element, the American Legislation Exchange Council. Many of these corporations that are sort of involved in her web are ALEC members. right? And so you have ALEC that's sort of writing this model legislation that attacks teachers' unions. And so I think that when you look at neoliberalism, you can sort of look at ALEC and how all of the corporations are sort of working together, and they're all sort of in bed with ALEC.
Are they affiliated with the Koch brothers? Is that their baby, as it were?
Um, yeah, just to refer back to my article, yeah, they are hugely. The Center for Media and Democracy found 98% of ALEC's funds come from corporations like ExxonMobil and corporations like Charles, the Koch Global Foundation. So basically, a large percentage of their funding comes from the Koch brothers. So
We've talked a lot about, at least with the other writers that I've interviewed on this series, who have really taken a fairly deep critique of neoliberalism and are looking at not just the fact that it's a market-based solution, but something that you highlighted earlier, which was the data mining, the constant monitoring of kids' emotions and how they perform and tracking them. And this is all about tracking the high performers into an educational track that will benefit them. Essentially what they're trying to do is cherry pick the 1%. Can we find these 1%ers and give them the advantages, and then track a number of other, another group into prisons, and then this other group into maybe just middling lives? And so what happens is that you have this very highly stratified society, almost like a class or a caste-based society that is not based on any kind of religious tenets, but rather through data mining, through constant metrics and monitoring of students and figuring out, well, are they going to be a good fit for this new market-based world that we're going to live in? And as one of the other writers for Truthout, Henry Giroux, who's also a board member, had said, we're not really doing education. We are training people. They are being trained. They're not being educated to think creatively. They're being trained to do a specific job. And in a sense, all the imagination, all that creativity that goes into the process of learning gets squashed in favor of being trained to do a certain kind of task.
I think that that's what you get with the Common Core. I think that with standardized testing, I know from personal experience, when I was in school, I'm in Texas, so for a long time I had the TOS test, and then it became the TAKS test, right? And I literally remember sort of learning their formula for how to regurgitate exactly what they want, into the essay form, and then immediately forgetting it right afterwards just to get through the test. And that's what it is. It's with standardized testing. They're just pumping this information into kids, and for the most part, from my personal experience, I think it's just a matter of regurgitating that information back. And that's not really learning. That's not really getting the elements you need to think critically about the world. And I think that's what Mr. Giroux points out in a lot of his work about pedagogy. And that's also what McDermott advocates for, is we're not making this space to sort of get a feel for other types of the way that people can learn. I do think that the data mining can definitely play a role into sort of pre-tracking and categorizing these students, which doesn't account for the critical issue, which is poverty. If you have a student that you're data mining and they're low performance, they're not performing well, it doesn't account for one, that things can change, that a student can turn around, but also it doesn't account for their why. There's these issues of poverty. If you're concerned about how you're going to get food, or if you have to help support your family, if you have these other critical issues of poverty going on, then yeah, you're not going to be paying attention as much. If you want to individualize education, it doesn't take data mining to do it. It takes talking to a student and learning who they are. And I think that that's what teachers would say as well. I don't know, I'm not an educator, but I think that teachers who really can get to the heart of what's going on with the student can figure out how to teach them in a way that will personalize what they're learning in a way that will be effective towards them. I don't think that there's any amount of data mining you can do that will actually individualize education for students. I think that that's something that teachers can do, and that's something that we should leave teachers to do.
Well said. Yeah, definitely well said. And Candice, I really want to thank you for being on the program and highlighting the article that you wrote for Truthout and using it as it's a very good article, and it serves as sort of a gateway to learn more about who's behind the Common Core state initiative that is adopted by 45 states at this point. And I encourage everyone who's watching this video or subscribes to Truthout to definitely read it.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Senator. Go ahead.
Candice Bernd is assistant editor and reporter with Truthout, and you can follow her on Twitter at Candice Bernd. And thanks for watching Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.